Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson is located here in Treaty 1 territory. That's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are delighted to see so many people here tonight, both in person and virtually, as we welcome Martha Brooks back to Winnipeg to celebrate her first novel for adults, though definitely not her first piece of writing, Dear Miss Lovelorn, Prose and Possibility. As I highly professionally reached out to pick up my introduction. So I won't take up too much of your time. We adore Martha here at the store, and we're so thrilled to have her back in Winnipeg. We've celebrated so many of her books in the past, and to celebrate this new book and a new venture for her as well in her writing is very exciting. Following my introduction, there'll be a conversation between herself and host Karen Toole, which will take place at the stools to my left. Then there'll be a reading, and following that, there'll be an opportunity for you folks to ask questions, if any of you have some. If you're located here in the space, please feel free to just put up your hand and I'll rush over to you with this handheld microphone, Sally Jesse Raphael style, and that'll just ensure that everybody watching at home can hear your question as well and prevent us from having to repeat it. If you are one of those people watching from home and do have a question yourself, please feel free to just write it in the chat and I'll put it to Martha as time permits. Dear Miss Lovelorn is an incredible epistolary novel that takes a certain character you might recall from Martha's Queen of Hearts and expands her world dramatically in a truly beautiful and interesting way. I won't say too much about it right now because you will be hearing about it, but it is truly a fascinating new direction for Martha and a genuinely lovely, heartfelt piece of writing. Your host this evening is Karen Toole, who grew up in the north end of Winnipeg, which was the doorway to ministry in the United Church. Her quest of ministry came through the pain of grief and loss. She believes deeply in the value of stories and in the reality of the body, mind, and spirit connection. She has offered many various continuing education courses in our city, along with media expressions of spiritual meaning. Martha Brooks herself is a 3-time winner of the Canadian Library Association Young Adult Book of the Year Award and has received the Ruth Schwartz Award, the Mr. Christie's Book Award, the Governor General's Award, and the Vicki Metcalf Award for her body of work. As mentioned, this is her first novel for adults. I can't wait to hear a little bit more about it. Please join me in welcoming Martha Brooks and Karen Toole.
Well, I'm clapping for Martha. That's why I was still clapping. I feel really privileged and honored to be asked by Martha to do this. And it's a sign, I think, of our trust that Martha and I have, that some of you who know Martha better than me would know a little bit about that journey of healing and trust. And I feel very honored tonight to be with you in the launch of this book, because my own opinion is that this is you should have been with us at breakfast yesterday. Okay, just imagine the Park Cafe, and I spot her and I go, it's awesome, it's just awesome. I didn't know what to expect because I come from that North End kid. I come from that I know the worst that we can do to each other, and Miss Lovelorn was not in my regular reading. I can tell you that. I'm not what I would call a romantic, and yet there's something in me that is. And when I got the book from Martha, I was going, okay, Martha, can convert me, convert me to the title and to the journey of what this is about. And you did. You did, Martha. I guess I went into my political mode very quickly. And for John in the back and for Nally Robinson and all of that it does, and I know you agree with me, I can see this crowd, we don't honor Manitoba authors nearly enough. You can clap for that. Yeah. Really don't. We have such talented people in our province, and we have people who take a stand and take risks and who risk their own souls in writing, and we just don't lift them up enough. So I was, first of all, really jumping up and down about the fact that I'm glad you wrote again, Martha. That I'm so glad that much has changed in your life and you didn't stop. You kept that journal, you kept the word, and that's, to me, like every time I see a pen, I still get excited. It's really vital. So I think this is a vital book, by the way, a really vital book that I'm going to buy about 3 of them tonight to tell people how vital it is, because I'm a city kid. Winnipeg is everything in Manitoba, don't you know that? And nothing outside the borders of the city. But of course, you gradually grow up and realize this is a big province. And there are a lot of people and a lot of cultures and a lot of different understandings in this province. And for me, this book points to a part of Manitoba's history and a part of Manitoba that we haven't honored enough either. In so many ways, and you're so intimately involved with that, Martha. You really are. So I was saying to Martha, and she captured the words. I talk better than I write sometimes, but I was saying it's like the geography of the soul of Manitoba to get this book situated where it is with the people in this book. It brings alive a whole historical aspect of how our province healed and what was it about. And it belongs to so many of us. I mean, I'm not going to ask you to show your hands, but tuberculosis, when I say the word, it's in people's history. It's in their reality now too, but it's in their history. And Martha, you were there in the midst of it. So this is what we got on about. And it is in that sense of vital book. I also fell in love. I said the word. I fell in love with Signy and with Raymond. I really did. So they mattered to me. And it takes a really good author to make their characters come alive that way, that I could hardly wait to find out what's going to happen, what's going to happen. And that's not a whodunit, that's a can love survive story. Yes. So I have some questions for you, Martha, to get you going on all of this. So I have a feeling that there's a lot of you in this book, and I'm not calling it your final book, but I think it's very personal on so many levels. So would you talk about that part, Martha?
Yeah, I was broken. And I had to write it to heal. And I started it 12 years ago in a field, Vaudry, in a wintry day with my then husband Brian before he succumbed to brain cancer a year later. And I said to him, the character that people most worry about in Queen of Hearts is Signy, because she's the one who's left behind. She's not able to leave, and here she is in this book. She's 9 years later, she's still there, and it's 1947, and we're on the cusp of discovering streptomycin. But can you imagine being in a tuberculosis sanatorium since you were 12 years old? And now you're 22, and you've had some really grotesque surgeries. You're still a beautiful young woman. But how do you keep hope alive? And I'm 79 years old. And I could tell you that you keep hope alive by still being in the world in an enlivened sense. And so when I was out in that field with Brian, and I said to him, this is a story I want to write about this young woman, but I know it's going to be 1947, and I know she's going to be still there. And how do I bring the world to her? And my darling husband said to me, well, why doesn't she write a Lovelorn column? And I said, oh my God, what an interesting idea. The world comes in, right? And so I said, well, maybe I should call it Dear Miss Lovelorn. And he said, oh, well, you might want to rethink the title.
That's what I told her. No, I'm not, she said.
Yeah. And then my dear friend Maureen Hunter, who's now living in Seychelles and a Canadian playwright, said to me, why don't you add Prose and Possibility to give it weight? And so that's what I did. And I vacillated back and forth with this book. I mean, I wrote 2 more books, and in that time Brian had died, and I was not hardly able to even think about continuing writing. And of course nobody wanted my books because they wanted a young adult book, another young adult book, because that's how I made my career. So I wrote, I met Jonathan, and we married in a kind of funny ceremony. And I moved to Edmonton with him, and I wrote 4 books while I was there. I wrote a memoir, and I wrote 2 other young adult novels, and then I wrote this one. And I kept sending it around, nobody wanted it. And I thought to myself, why don't I just publish this myself? And I had received a very generous amount of money from the Manitoba Arts Council to start the thing, so somebody believed in it. And then 3 years later, somebody said to me, well, why don't you apply for another grant to finish it? So I did. And, you know, $20,000.
And that's the thing that intrigues me for anybody who takes the risk of writing. Why do you write? And why do you risk putting it out there to be walked on or lifted up or criticized or acclaimed? Like, why? Where does that come from? For writers in general, but you can't answer for all of them, but for yourself, Martha, I know you well enough now to say, what is it in you that pushes that and pushes that?
Karen counseled me through my grief, by the way.
Well, I think this book and this book are a pair. Like you did notice it's letters.
Yeah.
I have noticed
It's
letters.
Yes, yes.
Lovelorn is around us.
Lovelorn is around us, yes. And I can't remember what I was going to say.
Oh, why you write? Why do you take the risk?
Okay, so
Why 4 books that we won't see? Why, you know?
so when, I mean, I write, period. I mean, when Brian died, and I wrote a bunch of journal entries, and I kept writing them, and it ended up being a just what I did. And this is this big heavy book, and I write, and I can't find this thing. I write so that I understand that I'm still around, and that oh, I can't find it. What the hell? It's not here. Yes, it is. My God, it's here. There we are. So what I wrote was, my diaries are old friends, witnessing my friendship with myself. I cannot imagine what I would do without these blue lines tenderly flowing across the page, saying, here I am, and I am still me. And knowing that life is change, and that my own anchor is me. My own anchor is me. This, to a large degree, is the resonant and compelling theme of Dear Miss Lovelorn. So writing for me, I still write, and my husband Jonathan says I come downstairs every morning and there you are with a pen in your hand, even if your hand is hurting. You cannot not write. It is part of who you are.
And of course, so does Signy.
And so does Signy. So she writes. She's written and written and written. So she's written since she was 11 years old, and now she's 22 years old, and she's starting to write. She's starting to have quite a bit of muscularity as a writer. So that when this journalist comes into her life and eventually says, you should, this woman who's written a Lovelorn column, he says, you should write this column. They should pay you to write it. And she says, oh, I'm not a writer. He said, oh, don't tell me you're not a writer, because every time I leave here, I know you're thinking before you even leave what you're going to write. You can't not write. He says, you're left-handed. That's the first thing I noticed about you. You have blue on your dent, a permanent dent here. This is what you do. So I write to save myself. Whether it's a book or whether it's another thick, heavy journal, it is my shelter. It is my home. And it matters to me.
And yet, the privilege of writing, I mean, we can do it and hide it, because you put it out there. And I think there are all kinds of writers. There's all kinds of writers sitting out here who have a book like that, who haven't put it out there.
Yeah.
And that's what you see in this book. Signy, who thinks she's simply writing for herself, gets convinced, moved out of her fragility, is what I feel in this book. And so many of us feel, I mean, we could be walking around in strong, healthy bodies, but we are fragile. So will you tell me about the fragility and why that theme? I mean, she's missing a rib. She's got a lung. I mean, come on.
She's had thoracolplasty, so she's had 11 ribs down this side here, and her lung is permanently collapsed. That was the state-of-the-art surgery that they did back then. So she's breathing with one lung. So she's fragile. So you know that if she's going to get out there, even if she gets her happy ending, is she?
Mm-hmm.
And how long is she going to live? Right? So that is courage, takes courage for her to draw a breath every single goddamn day.
Mm-hmm.
And to find some hope and some sensibility and some sense of possibility, when all around her, what it is simply it's change, change, change. Do I ever get my moment? Do I ever walk through the door of love? Is that going to happen for me? Right? So her fragility, still, she's strong in her fragility. I'm strong in my fragility. I'm strong in all the things that have happened to me. I'm strong in the loss that brought me to my knees, and I didn't think I'd ever get up again. But I did.
You know, I've read, Martha, some of your earlier books, and I would never put them down. But this book goes where you haven't gone before. I just want you to know that. And that's partly why I'm sitting here. When you asked me ages ago, I thought, well, I haven't even seen the book. And what am I going to say? And I'm no good at being fake. People have noticed that. And there's no fakeness in me when I say, I think this book has risen in you. You used the line a little earlier about it's a book of hope. Now, supposedly as a faith page writer, I should have been able to write about hope, and I tried to many times.
Mm-hmm.
But this book really does capture how if you've spent years in an institution, why aren't you institutionalized into believing there's no hope? But somehow you give Signy something that we're all searching for. and keep writing about that part of it.
Yeah,
Like, don't stop in that regard.
I think what spins the book is love, and it takes courage to love and keep on loving. When everything is just falling apart, how do you get up again, and how do you embrace the big unknown and still have faith that something wonderful could come around the corner when things are just crap? But it does happen because we are hit by horrible things. But then, just as magically and amazingly, something absolutely fabulous will come along and just smack us. And like, what's that? And that's happened to me over and over again. I think that's why I can get up and write another book.
No matter what anybody says about it.
No matter what anybody says about it, and no matter what anybody says, you know, this is a story about a lovelorn columnist. Well, this is a young woman who spent nine years in bed, and all of a sudden these people are writing to her, and her correspondence absolutely moved her. And she learns something from them. And they're unintentionally funny, and they're earnest, and she takes them seriously. And that's what absolutely opens the world to her in ways that she could not have expected. How can you lie in a bed for 9 years and have the world come to you? Well, somebody writes to you about their deepest, most terrible problem. And because you've never been out in the world, really, you have this sort of fresh, sparkling sense of what you might say. That's really helpful.
And you lived there.
Yes.
And you lived in Nina. Your
Yes.
father was a doctor.
Yes.
I mean, that's what makes this book, I think, really unique. I actually did write a few words here. There's so many levels in the book, because first of all, there's your own biography. And you're not writing about kind of an imaginary place in an imaginary world. You're writing about our geography. Here we are in Manitoba. You're writing about your father's work. You're writing about growing up in a community that was defined by a sanatorium.
The exiles.
Yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the levels that I go out and tell people about the book in that sense, because to me, I knew the word Minot, I knew the area, but I had no idea of the people within those walls until you opened the door. And then what happens to her is what happens to all of us in many ways, but there's this edge to it because of her reality. Being already institutionalized and cast out and not going to have a life.
That's right.
She's not, other people come and go, and she's just not going to have a life.
Nope.
And what happens? How does she find the life? And boy, that's better than any of the whodunit titles I've read in the last little while. And that's the other level I want to say. I know this is yours and you're going to read some more, but I want to point to another level of the book to me that is so many titles right now in our world are all about violence, are all about the worst we can do to each other, are all about why we're going to come to a horrible end in many ways. So many of the books are pointing to that, whether it be climate, which is a reality, or whether it be personal. Elizabeth, you studied the realities of lives and the dark side of that. So where do we look for, and I don't mean just lightness and tiptoeing, but where do we look for the genuine reality of a fragile young woman who's already not having a life? How does she find life? And what does she do for us in that process? So for me, that's, it's romance. They take chances. It's dreaming. And, Raymond comes into the picture. It's post-World War II. My father was a veteran. What happened to his love?
Right.
So commenting on whatever you want to say, Martha. So it wasn't really a question. It's just me rattling on about how I related existentially to the book.
Well, you have to remember that TV reached a long arm up to everybody. I mean, at one point, TV killed 14% of the world's population. It was the most hideous communicable disease above everything else. It just was a killer. And everybody in this province knew somebody who'd had TB, or someone who had worked there, or someone who whose marriage broke up because of it. Can you imagine? Marriages broke up, friendships broke up. People were so afraid of this disease that it was a culture unto itself. It was its own culture. I knew people there who had been there a long time and who would never be able to leave, even though they were cured of the disease. They didn't have the strength to do it. There's Oliver Whiteway, who came from an Indigenous man who came from Manitoulin Island, and he was existing with one lung, and he thought he might go back and trap. And he came back and he said to my dad, I don't really think I can be a trapper anymore. My dad said, okay, Oliver, we need a telephone operator and a mailman, and you're going to be at the hub of the whole place. So Oliver became the hub of the whole place. And he was a character. And
There's a mailman in here.
yeah, our names was Pain. This is my sister here, and he called her Big Pain. He called me Little Pain. I mean, this was what happened. And he was quite, interested in a lot of women, and he didn't want to get married. He didn't want to get tied down. And he met Agatha Jensen, Mennonite operating room nurse. And he sort of fell in love with her, but he didn't really want to commit himself. And I think they had something like a 7-year engagement or something. And then he did marry her, and he said, it's the best thing I ever did. But they didn't live that long. They stayed there. I think maybe he lived 10 years more, and she might have lived about the same. But they had their happy ending in that way. I mean, that was the reality of that disease.
And then I guess the other level I related to it, Martha, was so much of our lives, we look for that which kind of identifies us to some degree, but instead of letting it connect us to each other,
yes,
we end up using it to say, well, you don't know what I've suffered. You don't know. And yet there's so much that we could share if we would open up our stories to each other. And one of my sadnesses about our world is that we presume there are those who suffer greater than us, yes, and therefore we need to care for them. But we don't understand the stigma is part of all of us, that yes, we've all yes, had labels. And that we all have to, and again, you get at that in this book, like the people in the bed around her, the beds around her,
yes,
what she chooses to do about that and why she chooses to do it. I just found it, in that sense, I mean, inspiring is too small a word for it. I found it really changed my perception of the capacity for human kindness. And I don't read a lot of that stuff or see a lot of that stuff. So pass the book around and I think as you read from it, Martha, I do think Brian is in this book. I really do. I met Brian through your eyes, and he's very much in this book.
Right.
Your letters, these letters, lots of connection in there. And I think in that sense, you've gone to the places where a lot of us don't go with grief to bring life. So,
yeah.
So in that sense, you have to read from your book and field questions. And I'm looking at the clock. So.
Oh, okay. Well, I think what I'm going to do, and I don't know that I can see these are my glasses that I can see the road with, but Not good for, yeah, hold on.
So while Martha,
Rummages around.
yeah.
I've got some, sweetie, thank you. I know, yeah, this is my son-in-law, Mike. So this is, I think we use the same diopter when we're reading, right? But these, and we have the same classes, right? Yeah. So
just to bridge while she looks up her reading. Winnipeg and Manitoba, it's a strange province in many ways. And we were talking at breakfast about Maureen and Martha and myself, and how do we end up having a lunch together that leads to tonight. I was writing that column, but for these women, it would never have been a book. They are the authors. I wrote a column. I am a writer now, and I will say that. But for Martha and Maureen, it would never have been in that book of reflections. So I am filled with gratitude. And both of them, by the way, intimidated the hell out of me, the thought of going for lunch with them, because these are writers, and who am I? So, no, go ahead.
So I'm going to read to you since it's all written in diary entries and letters, and so I'm going to read a diary entry and a letter to you. This is I have to be able to see this and read at the same time. This is the first time she meets Raymond. Signy meets Raymond, and it's dated Thursday, June the 12th, 1947. Dearest diary. Today I met Raymond McLaren. Dr. Grant's surprise, the mystery guest he promised he'd bring by. Brief introductions, then Dr. Grant said, Mr. McLaren is here from the Wheat City Herald. He's come quite possibly to do a story on us. Mr. McLaren took off his hat. He is slim and very tall, with thick black curly hair and a shapely nose. Oh yes, and also a few freckles sprinkled across his face. He looked down at me, frowned, suddenly colored, then offered his hand. He's got quite the grip. And he said intently, my sincerest apologies for barging in on you. Dr. Grant said, I'll leave you to it then. And he blustered off onto the wards. Mr. McLaren looked around for a chair, and finding one, he dragged it over to my bed and said, is this okay? Flabbergasted, I said, yes. And as he sat, the thought crossed my fevered brain that I had not been given fair warning that Mr. Mystery Guest would be somewhere in his late 20s and smell of aftershave and hair tonic and something that is just him. And tomorrow is bath day. So I also thought about the small bottle of Lure Blue perfume that is buried somewhere behind a pile of books on my window ledge, too pathetically late to dig out, of course. Anyway, he launched into how his paper is considering a feature article on Pembina Hills Sanatorium, and Dr. Grant said I'd be a good person to talk to, not just because I've been here a long time, but because at the age of 22, I'd give the piece a certain youthful perspective. Mr. McLaren could barely look at me. Visiting the sick is something many people have trouble with, even apparently newspaper men. Next out of his mouth, the research I've been doing on this place. So many people have died here. You've been here, what, 9 years? Finally, he did look right at me, albeit briefly, with his lovely brown eyes. And I sat there unwashed in my green bed jacket with my hair flying all over the place. And I replied, mortified, I am not dying yet. He went red again, and he hung his head before quickly lifting it with a smile. Oh, I can see that you're not. Then he rattled on, look, maybe I should. That is, do you have a question that you'd like to, why don't you ask me what I do all day? I broke in. Do? This may not look like a home, Mr. McLaren, but it is. It is my home. It's where I live. People do live here, you know, even if it seems a funny sort of life we live. And we do things. Do? Well, for instance, he ventured. For instance, and I don't know what possessed me to tell him this, I am a writer. A writer, he repeated, suddenly alert. Excuse me, did you say a writer? My face blazing, caught as I was in the middle of such a surprising, outrageous admission, I clammed up. But he wouldn't let it go. He nodded his head for quite a bit and then prying gently, what sort of a writer? I wanted to hide under my covers. I wanted him to leave. And instead, I dug myself in further and told him, rather grandly, I am a diarist. And added, unpublished. Unpublished. A diarist. You mean you keep a diary? Oh God, it sounded so small. Oh, keeping a diary, a girl who's never done anything in her life or been anywhere. I keep a diary. There are 50 at least, I think. I haven't really counted them. I mean, maybe 40 diaries about life in this place, my observations, 50 or 40. That's a lot of writing, I would think, wouldn't you? Hours and hours. I mean, I do have a lot of time on my hands. I'm sure you do, he said kindly, staring down at his own hands. I hated his kindness. And thank God I'll never get to see him again, because soon after he made his excuses and said goodbye, tripping over the chair in his haste to leave and making me wonder why the hell he bothered to come in the first place. Signing off in shame and disgust. Signy. The Wheat City Journal, Great Manitoba, June the 13th, 1947. Dear Miss Jonasson, I hope you'll let me call you Signy. I apologize for the clumsy way I handled everything on Thursday. Can we try again? I talked with you about my editor, Mr. Frank Palmerston, and he's agreed that a story with you clearly at its center might be an interesting angle for our paper. I'm only an hour's drive away. If you're agreeable, would Friday the 20th of next week be okay? How about 2 o'clock? Please write me back and let me know. Yours truly, Raymond McLaren. P.S. I'm not usually so bumbling. And I find you intriguing.
A little part of me has spent about 10 years in spiritual health care, and there's nothing worse than kindness inappropriately given.
Yes.
To the person who has dignity and strength and deserves respect, that kind of condescending kindness. What should I say? You just don't want to put the words in their mouth. You need to listen. And that's what she teaches me. Anyway, So I think we're gonna open it to questions. Where did John go? I think he was gonna run around with the mic. John, where'd you go?
Hi, right here.
Hi.
So yes, if you do have any questions, please just put up your hand and I'll run over to you with the microphone. Yes.
I haven't had a chance to read the book yet, but it sounds really intriguing. My question is, how did you choose the name Signy? And is it someone that you know, or you just love the sound of it, the rhythm of it? Just curious.
That's a really good question. In Queen of Hearts, which I named her already, and I wanted an Icelandic heroine because my background is Icelandic, and I just chose Signy because it's a beautiful name, and I dedicated the book to my second cousin Agnes Bartle, and she had a sister named Signy. I just wanted to do that.
Another aspect of Manitoba, Icelanders.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
Martha, I
Yes.
just wanted to tell you how inspired I am. You entertained people at 9 a.m. in 1956. How old were you? When you would come riding on your bike and Oliver called you Little Pain.
I would have been 12, because I was born in 1944, so I would have been 12. I'm not a good mathematician. I think that's just kind of error. Anyway,
The patients always looked forward to seeing you. That was their entertainment for the day, to see a young person.
mhm. And my sister is here, Alice, and the same for both of us. We were part of, we were part of that, and
You certainly were.
yeah, and I remember a little story when my father there was a group of old men that stayed in the sanatorium. And they had TB, but they were cured. They would go away in the summer and then they would come back in the winter and he would let them stay there like it was their old folks home sort of thing. And then the sanatorium board said to him, "Al, you can't do that anymore. These people do not have TB." He said, "But they might break down." And they said, "Well, we can't be affording to have all these old men. They have to, go somewhere else." So one of them was a man who had been a porter on the trains. It's African American, and because he was the oldest, my dad worried about him, and he said, "Would you mind just checking up on him, seeing how he is?" And so I said, "Well, give me his phone number." And so I went and I saw him. And we spent a bit of time together. He was gobsmacked that I had come to see him. And then as I was leaving, he said, "I want you to tell your dad for me, please. There are no hard feelings. We had a pretty good run at it." And I said, "Oh, okay." And he said, "But will you come back to see me again?" And I said, oh, yes, I will. And he said, "When?" So that started a friendship that lasted until he died in his 90s. But that was the extension. That was the power. That was the power of that place, right, Alice?
It was, and I think we always felt like we were part of this very large family.
Yeah.
I did live there during your sister's wedding.
Oh,
That was a gala event for all the residents.
were you lived there, or you patient there? You lived there.
Yes. No, I was patient.
You were a patient. See? Hey.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Yay. Get TV and lived to 99.
Any other questions? John's looking around anxiously and concerned. There we go.
I'm actually reading A Hill for Looking right now. It's one of your first books, right?
Where did you find it?
I went to
Florida, borrowed from a friend. Yeah, 1982, I wrote that book.
Yeah.
Boy, it's,
So
it's,
I
not,
just-
it's really, really out of print.
So it is it completely autobiographical, biographical?
Yes, yes, it is. And
Yes, it's
it-
right.
it's,
Dr.
it's, I call it, it's like a memoir novel. It's kind of, I don't know, metafiction. I don't know what you call
Yeah,
that,
it's like I'm just kind of starting it and you're, it's summer and you found a dog. and puppies
Well,
and
yeah,
it's
like
just
all
a
things
story.
that happened in that book happened, but they didn't happen in that one particular summer. I brought that together, and so that makes it different, right?
You formed a friendship with a patient, and I just wondered. if-
There's another one, yeah, and I was her friend until she died. She died of Lou Gehrig's disease.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And were there any other questions at all? Yes.
Marilyn. Hi, Marilyn.
Hi, Martha.
Hi, Marilyn.
I think I might just cry at my question. It was such a beautiful place,
Mhm.
and that doesn't really exist anymore.
That's right.
Only in our minds,
Mhm.
especially you and Alice.
Yeah.
Do you remember the last time you were there?
Yes, it was last week.
Oh, right. I mean, they're there.
They're there, actually, last week. I kind of, but it's kind of,
But the house is gone.
the house is gone, all of the infirmary is gone, all those beautiful Tudor style buildings are gone. There's one kind of standing, but, and people, I mean, there was a fellow who introduced me to the Boulder Gazette, and she said, oh, you lived on the grounds. He said, did you live in one of those bungalows? And I said, no, actually, we lived in the superintendent's residence, which had wraparound verandas and sleeping porches and 2 fireplaces. And it was, this lovely grand house that we paid a grand total of $25 a month to rent.
Wow. Wow. I was so sad when I learned it was gone. I couldn't believe it, actually.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was like a castle,
Mhm.
not a special kind.
And of course, to interject, this is Marilyn McKinnon.
Yeah.
And their families, their dad, Dr. W.B. McKinnon, would go out to the sanatorium to do the orthopedics for Dr. Al Payne.
Yeah.
And
My father.
so it's a long family history.
Yeah. Yes.
Early childhood memories.
Yes. And I just want to point out that Margaret did the cover for the book. There she is.
So do you remember the last time the house was there and you were there?
Oh, it was when my beautiful daughter over there, was about 4 or 5 and it's gone now.
Yeah,
Mhm.
thank you.
My daughter is now almost 6 feet tall.
How wonderful.
But the things that are gone are not gone. They're not gone. And this is, I guess, if I admire anything in the Marine Hunter and Martha Brooks, is that I'm no academic on writing. I've helped people release things with writing. But one of the things in the writing classes, you're always told to write what you know. Write what you know. Don't try and put yourself in China if you've never been, but come from the place of your roots. And to me, when that shows up in this book and in other books that you've done, there's an authenticity in that, and there's a validation for all of us. There is no insignificant life.
Yes.
And that's what this book says. And that's what that healing center was about in the
Yes.
event.
Yes.
And that's our province and that's us. And we need to be telling people about this, that this is part of our, not just historical journey, but our healing journey as people.
Mhm.
So Yeah, I got so excited about it. And I was away on a trip of a lifetime in Ireland, and I thought no book will hold me because I'm seeing all these beautiful, wonderful places that I've dreamed of. I can hardly wait to get back to the hotel to see what. So thank you. I mean, thank you for having me at home and having me in another world and recognizing some of this too, Martha. So. And you should have the last word, not me.
Oh, well,
Unless there's more
I just wanted just
One more.
yes,
question.
yes.
Martha, something that amazes me about your writing is the way that you have always been close to death in your theme, and the way that there's a shadow that hangs over all of your characters and how they cope with that. And I wondered if you had anything to say about that.
I mean, I was sick. I was a sickly kid, and so I was very familiar with being close to the edge as a child with pneumonias. But then also because death washed across our doorsteps, our doorstep every single day. And it formed a sense of understanding that really the two exist back to back. We cannot be afraid of it. It is part of us. Yeah. I just want to acknowledge my friend Maureen Hunter for her editing, both substantive and copy editing. It's difficult to wear both hats, but she really dug in and helped me with that from C-Shop. So yeah, I wanted to say that. I think we're done. And thank you all so much for coming out tonight. You just never know who's going to show up. And it's a welcome. I live in Edmonton now, and I feel so welcome back into my community by some very special people here tonight. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Martha, and thank you, Karen. We will be moving on to the signing portion of the evening right now, so just a few very quick notes. The first is that we'll ask you all to remain in place for just one moment while we safely transport Martha over to the signing table. That's located that is located right beside the cash desk. There are copies of the book available at the signing table. There are copies of the book available at the cash desk itself. You can get a copy signed before you pay for it. Just please do pay for the book before you leave. There's a moment of connection later on in the narrative of this book that's described very succinctly and evocatively as being so solid and real and warm. And those are words that entirely describe this narrative as well, along with so many others. So the book is Dear Miss Lovelorn by Martha Brooks. Thank you to Karen for hosting this conversation. Thank you to Martha for joining us again. And thank you all for joining us here tonight. Have a wonderful evening.